Okay, so I am going to be recording just really it's a walkthrough of the current state of Aqualab. We're calling this Milestone 3, and what that means is this is the first version of Aqualab that has multiple jobs in it that use kind of all the main mechanics and demonstrate those. So right out of the gate, we have to say this is a very early version of the game. It has one major issue, I would say, and that's that it provides very little guidance inside of the game. And because of that, your students are probably going to get stuck, and there's going to be some places where things don't make sense really at all, and they don't really know what to do next. So I'm creating this walkthrough so that you at least have an idea of some of the mysteries that we had in our minds as we designed this, and hopefully I'll be able to unveil some of those so that you can actually interact with this thing. So upon loading the URL, you should see the Unity logo, and it'll load up and it'll come here. And we have a little bit of dialogue between Jules, who's the kelp researcher, and your character. So there's a problem in kelpdom, and you're finding out that your name is October. And you can just kind of click through these things. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because these are all very early dialogues. None of this will make it into the final game. The purpose of this screen really is to pick a job and really to launch into it. Before we even get into that, I think it makes sense to make sure that you understand the total structure of the way Aqualab is set up. And the high level structure is that from this screen, we call it the helm, you're going to pick a job that's the active job. And in almost every case, that job is going to require you to go take your little submarine out, find some new species, and that means they're going to go into your tablet. And then you're going to do some experiments to find out how those species interact with one another. And then you're going to argue to complete the level based on something you found. In jobs 2 and 3, we're also going to be exposing a little bit of modeling and prediction as a mechanic. So that high level thing of pick a job, go explore, run some experiments, and then use what you learned there to argue for a case. That's the high level structure that we want everybody to understand. So let's go ahead and do that. So when you first go into the job board, again, it kind of tells you a little bit about how this works. And you've only got one job available, so you click it. None of the things here necessarily matter a whole lot. This is really designed to be an onboarding job, so click accept. Now here again, it's going to give a little bit of guidance. It's going to say we've got to head over to site B because we're just kind of building some basic understanding of really trying to understand this ecosystem. So let's go ahead there. So to do that, you exit the helm, and now you see the map of the whole boat, and here what we're going to do is click on the sub. And the purpose of this job really is to understand why it is that this kelp ecosystem isn't working well. So we're going to cruise over there, and we're going to try to look around and see what's all there. So you navigate over to site B using your mouse, and then you can press the button or press the E button to dive down. It gives you a little bit of guidance. It's saying go down to the floor. That's where you're going to find stuff. We'd hate to see you just cruising around up here the whole time. And what you're doing here is just trying to collect everything in the environment. And you do that by kind of going near some things that look like they might be interesting, and you press the space bar. And now you're in scan mode, and anything that you can scan or capture will have one of these icons by it. So I can hold that and I can scan. I can find a sea star. I can scan this thing and I can find an urchin. Oops. I can scan this thing, and I'm going to get some kelp. And that's really about it. The other thing that we have to do while we're here is grab the water chemistry info. So we scanned this little probe, and this is kind of the water chemistry probe. So it's calling this the urchin barren. It's low temperature, low oxygen, and it's telling you some things about the kelp dropping. And that's about it. You're done with the screen, so you can click the back button to get back up to the surface. It'll do a little scan here and make sure that you got the main species of the kelp, the urchins, and then the water chemistry, and it'll warn you if you didn't. but we did. Okay, so now we cruise back to our ship and go back on board. For this first level, there's this little bits of guidance, so this should help and help reinforce that loop that I was explaining of job, observe, experiment, and then argue. So it's telling you at this point, like, hey, let's go into the experiment room and figure out how these things relate with one another. Okay, so in the experiment room, we really only have this one kind of experiment right now, and we'll see it come up here in just a second. And really what it's going to do is help students form an understanding around the food webs that exist. Click the start button over here on this kind of tablet. We disabled all the other experiment types. They'll be coming in later versions, so we just left the observation tank, and that is going to allow us just to observe basic behaviors. We pick the water chemistry that we have available to us. In this case, it was the urchin barren kind of configuration. That was the data we captured from that probe, and we're going to set up a tank like that. And now we drop our two species in here and start the experiment. And really, we're just looking for new behaviors. So we know these species exist, and now we want to know how they relate with one another. And so far, they're not really doing much. They move around. There's nothing to capture, but pretty soon we're going to see, yeah, these actions. So when one of these comes up, you can click on it, and that is going to kind of explain like what was the interaction that was taking place. And in this case, we learned this little fact that urchin eats giant kelp. Notice that your tablet over here just was bouncing. That happened before as well when I first captured those species, and that's supposed to just indicate that you've learned something new. And that brings another question up. There's this character up here we've been calling Kevin, and the idea of Kevin is that as the game continues to be developed, Kevin will always have some guidance of what to do next. It's kind of like your guide. So this part, you just kind of have to know. It's really weird. This says end over here, and this is how you get out of the experiment. And I would suggest you even warn your kids about this, that when you're in the experiment, you got to click back on the tablet to get out. It can be kind of hard to find. Want to end the experiment? Yep. Cool, so we learned this one thing, urchin eats giant kelp. And that was really the result of this little observation experiment. Again, you can see this thing's bouncing over here, and if we look over here, this tablet really is representing all the things that we need to know, or that we are learning, I guess, maybe is a better way to put it. There's a little bug here where this text gets cut off, but that's urchin eats giant kelp. And what we're looking at is like, what do we know about urchins? What do we know about kelp? And right now we only know one thing about them. We also, in the tablet, have information about the water chemistry that we've encountered. And so far, this is only one place that we found, the urchin barren. And again, in future versions, we'll start using some of these water chemistry variables. And then this area is for models, and we haven't done any of that yet. So I'll get out of here. I just kind of wanted to show you that for a second. Okay, so after we leave the experiment, we've kind of already come, if kids are paying attention, we've already got a little bit of an understanding, like what happened to this place. And now we're going to, the urchins are eating the kelp, and that's what's going on. That's why there's no kelp. So we go into the office to go kind of explain this. This screen obviously is also stubbed in, but the idea is that what we're doing is the person who gave us the job, we're going to talk with them and tell them like what we've learned. So we click the communications button. So this text is supposed to represent the job giver. In this case, it was Jules was the person's name. So, hey, did you figure out the culprit that destroyed the kelp? And the idea here is that you can click on any one of these and it's going to open up your tablet to that page. Behaviors, models, we haven't done those yet, or ecosystems. And you could, come in here and say, okay, well, I observed an ecosystem, and click on your ecosystem, and you could say, well, the O2 was at 50 milligrams a liter, and that really doesn't answer the question, so the conversation just kind of moves on. And it's giving you a little hint now. It's saying, how about, did you notice any interactions between creatures? So we can go over here and say, well, we saw the urchins eat giant kelp, And this is very early level, so it's like, you got it. That's all you had to figure out. And now we've demonstrated kind of the core loop of a job. Again, a little bit of kind of background text, where Jules, the kelp researcher, you and Kevin, your jelly blob guide, are, we're kind of having a little conversation about that. So this thing ends saying, cool, that was the job. Thanks. You figured out what the problem was, and go back to the job board to do something new. And that is really the main loop of the game. And now it's just going to get more complicated on top of that. So let's go out. And if you remember, the helm is where you get your jobs. So we can go in there and get a new job. If you explore in the tablet right now, there's not really a whole lot has changed in here. We didn't really learn anything new. Eventually, we're going to want to make sure that, well, here, did we log that one? No. Eventually, we're going to put in some things where you can see which jobs you've already done and that here as well. But right now, that's really about it. So you can go into the helm and go back into the job board. And now we've got 2 new jobs available to us. We can see that we completed this one. And now we've got 2 new jobs we can do. And I'll tell you right out of the gate, you can do these in any order that you want. They're both going to introduce new ideas, really. One of them, Bearing Questioning Baron, is going to be all about what it looks like when an ecosystem is actually running healthily. And then the second one is really going to say, hey, can we fix an ecosystem that's not running well by what we know? So I'm going to do the Bearing Questioning Baron quest next. The Urchin Baron. Okay, so what we're finding out is that Urban is the name of the character who's giving out this job. There's a bunch of purple urchin, and at this location, Site A, people are worried that this is going to turn into an Urchin Baron, where everything gets gobbled up. And by the way, that's a phrase that you might want to introduce to your kids, just to say an Urchin Baron is when there's lots of urchins and they've eaten all the food around them and the ecosystem's kind of out of whack. So what he is asking you to do, or they are asking you to do, there's not really more than that. We're trying to figure out if this is going to become an Urchin Baron and put his mind at ease. So this one is going to have us looking at Site A. Again, I know that it would be really useful to kind of remind students that Site A is where they're going now. So if they're doing the Urchin Bearing one, where they're going to need to go is go check out the ecosystem exists, and this one happens to be right over here to the left. And we can dive down. Well, hopefully everyone will notice this is a different looking thing right out of the gate. It looks like there's, bigger kelp. It's not those little stick things. There's some big leaves. So we can scan here and let's see what we get. Oh, it's a whole new species. It's called bull kelp. The last ones were giant kelp. Still kelp. And then obviously this critter is up here and hanging out. Let's see what that is. That is an otter. Okay, what else is in this ecosystem? Well, I've seen these before. Oh, that's a bull kelp. And it's our urchins again. Okay, so we've got urchins, bull kelp, and otters in this ecosystem. So that's interesting. And let's get the water chemistry. Cool. And that should about do it. And again, you should have seen this thing. We've got all this new stuff in here. We've got 2 ecosystems, the cool kelp forest and the Urchin Baron. And we also have a couple new species. We've got bull kelp. We don't really know anything about them yet. And sea otters, and we don't really know anything about them yet either. So again, the rhythm is go find some new things, do experiments on them to find out how they relate with each other. So that's what we're going to do next. Oops. So let's go into the experiment room. Again, we have this one kind of experiment where we observe behaviors. That's what we'll get from this. Now we've got 2 ecosystems to choose from. We could see what would happen if you put certain species in different, kind of water configurations, temperature and pH and the like. For this one, I'm just going to kind of stay on point and just keep talking about the cool kelp forest and see how things act there. So there's a couple ways that you could approach this. You could put all the relevant species in this tank together, and in this case, that would be the urchins, the bull kelp, and the otters, and that's fine to do it that way. Or you could pair this up and do just 2 at a time and really pay attention. I'm just going to put all 3 in and kind of watch all 3 of them interact. And let's see what they do. Obviously, we have some stubbed in otter art here. Oh, okay. I missed it. Okay, well, we got this one. Okay, urchins eat bull kelp. That's not too big of a surprise. They like the giant kelp. Urchins also eat bull kelp, we learn. And we also just found out that the sea otters eat the urchins. Okay, and again, we've got this kind of weird interface, but this is how you get out of here, is by clicking over here on the tablet. So we learned 2 kind of behaviors during this one. Urchin eat bull kelp and sea otters eat urchins. Great. Now, here's again where you would need a little bit of guidance. We could go to the office right now and try to argue from this and say, this is what's going on. And that would be fine. And I'll fast forward and I'll say we're going to run into some issues if you do that. So the thing that you can do next to, that's a new mechanic, we haven't really introduced it yet, is we can go into the modeling room and we can really get at that key question of, well, what's going to happen in the future? And that's what we can do in modeling. So to really answer this question that we're working on, is the kelp going to die? Like, is it going to become an urchin barren? Let's go into the modeling room. Okay, a little bit of intro here. And the basic idea here is we add all the behaviors we know to the model, and that is combined, and it's going to create some new graphs. And what we know already, the historic data, is already being graphed here. This came from that little probe that we had in the water. And what this graph is showing is the populations of the 3 different species and how they relate with each other. So we see the kelp population that's kind of in this yellow going up and down, kind of, it's got a little bit of a wave. And we see the urchin population kind of having these repeated spikes, and we see the sea otter population. So the goal here is that we're saying we know this happened in the past. How can we set up a model that explains and kind of describes that truth that we already know? So the way we do this is we add rules from our bestiary. In this case, we have the rule sea otter eats urchin. So that's part of this kind of food web model that we're building. And then we also know that the urchin eats the bull kelp, and that should describe the relationships that are, of importance here. So now what we do is we set our starting conditions for each of these things and say, well, if we start with a certain amount of urchins, like we see at that location, and notice there's like a green tab, we know that there were 500 urchins there. We know that there were 40,000 of the bull kelp, and we know that there were 25 of the otters. And because these are the right food web rules to describe what's happening, and we set the conditions correctly, what's happening is our little model, our simulation, is lining up exactly with the historic data that we've got. And the idea here is once you've synced up the historic data, then you can use that to predict, to find out what's going to happen next. Again, I know this interface needs a lot of help. That's why we wanted to make these videos to explain this. So now that we have a model that describes what already happened, let's predict what's going to happen next. And what we're seeing is that no, this ecosystem kind of keeps looping and repeating. This looks fine. One thing doesn't eat all the others and kill off everything. And we can hit this button, and now our model is complete. Notice that a new thing went over into the tablet, and it's a new kind of information that we've got, and that's one of these models. So now we've got a model that predicts, like what's going to happen in this cool kelp forest, given that we haven't made any changes. So now we're totally ready to do the argument. And again, you could have done that first and then come back, but I wanted just to show you how modeling works. So we go here again, and we go into a conversation here with the person asking about the urchin baron. So people are getting panicky, is an urchin baron coming? And now we're making a claim. Yeah, site A is going to become an urchin baron, and you can try to argue for that, or no way, site A is totally safe. So given what we've seen, I'm going for site A is totally safe. And the question is, well, how do you know that? So you could, mention some behaviors you saw, like sea otter eats urchins, and that's interesting. Yeah, I think it helps. But do you have any, evidence, for how they help? So this is where I guess you could say, you like went to the environment, and that really doesn't have anything interesting in there. You could say that one of the things that's interesting about this is because the sea otters eat the urchins and the urchins eat the bull kelp. That doesn't like totally explain it. And where we want to get you going is towards using this model to say, I've actually simulated this whole thing out and seen the interconnections between these three species, and that ends up being the thing that predicts that no, it won't be a problem in the future. Cool. So the otters are eating the urchins, and the urchins were the ones eating the kelp, and because they're keeping the population in check, we should be able to move on. Okay, so we've done 2 out of the 3 jobs at this point. And now, remember, we go to the helm in order to pick a new job, and this will be the final one that's in this demo. And that's the is urchin baron fixable? Okay, you've seen the urchin baron, right? Well, can it be fixed? Now, technically for this one, we don't have anything really new to like species or whatnot. And we just have to think, well, what's different between these 2 kelp forests? And hopefully kids are immediately saying, well, otters are the big difference. So let's make a model that would describe what would happen if we introduced otters to this other environment. So no need to use the sub this time. For this one, we can go right into modeling. And the question is, what happens if we take our original urchin baron and we make some changes to it? So the same general rules apply. We're going to add these rules, these behaviors that we know. We know that the otters eat the urchins, and we know that the urchins eat the giant kelp, which is the one that we're concerned about this time. And we have to set our starting conditions and say, okay, well, right now there's 500 urchins and there's 40,000 kelp, and you again see our numbers kind of line up. And then we hit predict this time. Well, this one's showing us what is going to happen in the future, and actually it's going to get even worse. The kelp population is going to continue to drop, and we're going to kind of get into this gnarly little setup where it's really just kind of at a really low simmer. So what we can do now is, because we've got these rules, we unlocked this ability to change the situation. So we can do things like, well, what if we just added a ton more kelp and we just intervened? And you can see the chart just disconnects, and just a whole bunch of kelp hopped in at a moment. And you can see that kind of fixes it. Like, it does something, but mostly what happens is the urchins just continue to multiply and then gobble it all up again. So that doesn't seem to help. And if we add urchins, that really doesn't make a difference at all. Maybe even accelerates the process. But you can see as soon as we add any otters to the mix, pretty much any range of otters fix this thing. It's just the presence of any. If you look at the chart, a little quick view, you'll see that the otter population, pretty much no matter how many you put in, they're going to peak. That's where they're going to run out of urchin food, and then they're going to fall into this rhythm with the other species in there. So anything like this is going to meet our exact need, and we can hit test. And this is what's allowing us to simulate what would happen if we introduced otters. So again, we go into the office. Now we know some new stuff, and we can argue for this job, saying there's no way we can fix site B. And again, we get a couple claims we can make, and our big one is site B can be fixed with otters. Well, how do you know? Like, why otters? And again, there's a couple things we can say about this. We can say, well, the otters eat the urchins, and that's pretty cool. But at the end of the day, it's going to be our model where we simulate the whole thing, where we look at our urchin baron rescue model, and that's going to be the thing that is going to justify our claim. So this is really a demo of just 3 jobs that use these different tools. That's at the end. So at this point, we've completed all the jobs. Oops. There's no other jobs to do after these 3. There's more coming, of course. And hopefully just seeing this walkthrough will help you answer some of the places where kids are going to get stuck. Again, we know that it's missing a lot of guidance, and that is kind of top priority, and we'll be putting more and more guidance in and polishing these interfaces. But in the meantime, hopefully your kids can play around this, and you can collect some really useful feedback for making the game better. I think that's it for us now. So thanks everybody. Hopefully this video helped. Feel free to ask us any questions that come up.